live, and you may begin at your will.
I see there's a few more people in the waiting room, so I'll wait just a moment. All right. Welcome, Restonians. Welcome, Reston Association members. Tonight, we're having our second lake community discussion. As it came about last year in response to increased interest from our members about what we were doing with regard to our 4 lakes and their environmental health and all things lakes, I would call it. We started with a semi-annual meeting last fall, and this is our spring one. So we hope to answer questions in advance for you, as well as reiterate, the lines of communication so that you know who all you can contact. So we're hoping for a lively discussion and to address the elements of all of our 4 lakes. I am the president of Reston Association. I am the outgoing president of Reston Association. So I do hope everyone has voted in our election. They close on Friday. So if you haven't, please do, or call member services to get elected. And Sean, can you put up the agenda so we can quickly, go through there?
And Mike is getting that up for you.
Oh, Mike's got it. I'm glad to see we have up to 45 participants. That's really great. So here's our agenda tonight, and there I am, I'm number 1. And I'm going to move quickly to number 2 and hand this off to Larry Butler, our COO. You will see that tonight we do have our CEO, Hank, we have our COO, Will Peterson with our watershed manager, and I'm sure you'll get introduced to some of the other folks. Bill Kirkpatrick from our aquatic environmental consultants was with us tonight. And I also know Doug Britt from our environmental advisory committee chair. He's with us as well tonight. So I think we've got enough people to answer your questions. So Larry, I'm going to turn it to you, and there's my dog barking. So mute.
All right, thank you, Julie. And Mike, if you want to go to the next slide, and we'll just start running through the slide deck. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just talk a little bit of the background and sort of the historical overview of the lake management activities here. And for those of you who were in one of our 2 meetings last year, some of this will be a repeat. We're hoping that we have a wider range of citizens with us tonight. So for those, I apologize for the repeat, but I think it's important to understand that. So next slide, please, Mike. So Reston's lakes, we have 4 lakes, Anne, Thoreau, Audubon, and Newport, and a couple ponds. And the lakes were developed by Gulf Reston Mobile Land Development, the Reston master developer, as multi-use impoundments. Stormwater management is a key function that these serve. Clearly, recreation, boating, fishing. I'm not going to say swimming because it's not permitted. Aesthetics, people love to walk around the lakes. We've got trails that circumnavigate the lakes and get you close to the water on a number of occasions. And then, of course, fish and wildlife habitat. So they truly are multi-use impoundments, and our management efforts that you're going to hear about later from myself and Bill and Will, we'll talk about how we're touching on each one of those aspects of the lakes. Key element, though, is that these are urban lakes. They're in highly developed watersheds. This is not a Lake Tahoe type situation where you have thousands of acres of forested watershed that doesn't have erosion problems and a few nutrient problems. With those high percent of impervious surfaces, range roughly between 18 and 25% in our watersheds. That creates some problems. We've got high stormwater runoff, I'm sure many of you have witnessed that during some of our high rain events. The erosion and the resulting sedimentation, and it's the sedimentation getting into the lakes that keeps a lot of the nutrients. Phosphorus is bound by soils here in Virginia, or bound to soils. And so the more sedimentation we have entering the lakes, the more phosphorus we have. And Bill will talk a little bit about the relationship of phosphorus to algae and plant growth. And that leads to nutrient loading. And what this means, it's cultural eutrophication. Eutrophication is the natural aging process of lakes. And when you put people in the midst of a lake watershed, in these cases, man-made lakes, that expedites that aging process. And that term is called cultural eutrophication. And Bill may touch on a little bit of that later. Next slide, please. So these are just some facts about Reston's lakes. And I should point out that presentation I think will be available tomorrow on our website. So I'm not going to go through all these details, but some of you may find these really interesting. But as an example, I want to point out, if you look at Lake Newport, our newest lake, built in 1981, it's a relatively small lake, also has a small watershed of only 135 acres, compared to Lake Audubon right next to that, where you've got a lake it's larger, but it's a 1,500 acre watershed that can grow in that watershed. And so the impacts of rainfall, cultural eutrophication and so forth are more extreme the larger the watershed, particularly in urban context. And so that's part of what makes these lakes part art and part science. It's a delicate balance trying to achieve, all the basically the right levels for all of those various uses that I talked about in one of the early slides. And then you can also see at the bottom here, the percent of the watershed that is actually Reston Association property. Very, very little. So the amount of property that we can directly control and do best management practice, things like that, is quite limited. So we rely on individuals in the watershed doing best practices, whether it's the way they use lawn fertilizers and things like that, to help maintain the health of these lakes. Next slide, please. So some of the past management actions that RA has done, I apologize for my dog barking there. We have one of the most robust water quality data sets of any urban lakes, certainly in Virginia. It goes back to the early 1980s, and Bill will talk in more detail about that later. And we really look at the biological traits, those things that sustain the life of the lake. It's phosphorus, nitrogen, dissolved oxygen, temperature, the phytoplankton, which are the algae and the zooplankton. And we got these lakes deeded to us in the early 80s from the developer. And in 1984 was really the first management activity. I recall that day fondly, where on July 6th, we stocked grass carp in Lake Thoreau and Lake Ann for South American Elodea, where that plant had covered about 40% of the lake surface area in lakes. And we were, but overly successful with that stocking program. We removed all the plants within 2 years, and neither of those lakes had plants for about 12 years, which is not really what you want for a healthy lake ecosystem. Most of you are probably familiar with our periodic dredging of accumulated sediments in the cove and the shallow areas. We've been doing that since 1984. Not happen every year. It's a very expensive management activity. And we have done herbicide and algicide treatments periodically as needed over the lakes as well. And again, you'll hear more detail about that later. And we've done fish population surveys. Fish are they're the top predator in the lakes. And so we want to make sure periodically that we've got a good diversity of the fish species, the sizes, the age classes, and things like that. We have been doing water management and education for many, many years. One of the things we're most proud of is the stream restoration project that really impacts the Lake Audubon and Lake Ann watersheds, and that was at no cost to the members through a private mitigation bank. We have done and continue to do shoreline stabilization, and then, of course, trash and debris removal, which is particularly keen after a large storm event. Next slide, please. So the current issue we have here, and these are very typical of urban lakes all across the country. This is not just, you know, Virginia or mid-Atlantic. Is, as I mentioned earlier, the nutrient enrichment, sedimentation, that's that eutrophication process. And it's a really difficult thing to head off. And it takes the acts of not only the association as the owner of these impoundments, but also all the individuals in the watersheds. Submerged aquatic vegetation, SAVs, and invasive exotic species such as hydrilla. You'll hear more about that later. Algae blooms, which, you know, blue-green algae are the most problematic, in part because they fix atmospheric nitrogen, so they have a competitive advantage over other types of algae, the brown algae, diatoms, and regular green algae. So the conundrum is that the SAVs make the water clear, which is good for aesthetics, good for fish and wildlife, but too much of a good thing impacts other uses. And we certainly experienced that last year with the hydrilla, the impact to boating, and even aesthetics for that matter. So controlling the SAVs can potentially increase algae bloom chances because those SAVs take up a lot of nutrients from the water column and the sediments. And so what we strive for is a well-balanced lake system that has, you know, 20%, maybe 30% coverage by SAV. And when I mean coverage, that doesn't mean all the way up to the surface, but over the aerial acreage of the lake, that we've got about, you know, 20 to 30% of plants growing at least from the bottom. And that's sort of the sweet spot that we attempt to get to, but it's very, very difficult, as you can well imagine. And that's for fish habitat, you know, bird habitat and all the amphibians and so forth, as well as the water quality benefits that are derived from that. Next slide, please. So the SAV management options, TRIPLOID grass carp, which again, I said we've done periodic stockings over the years. Our initial one in 1984 was way too successful, at least from a broader lake management standpoint, because there were no plants in the lake for years. The use of herbicides, which we have done, and then algae management options are algicides, alum treatment, which is very, very expensive and a little bit tougher to do in urban lakes because of the flashy storms that we get in terms of you know, the turnover of the volume of water in the lake during large storm events. And then the other thing is to let it run its course. Typically an algae bloom is there because you got perfect conditions of temperature, light, and nutrients. And these blue-green algae, again, they fix atmospheric nitrogen. And when they eat up the available phosphorus, you know, that algae bloom dissipates. And we actually saw that happen last year on Lake Thoreau. And a key to all of this is that note on the bottom is, you know, how do we, as the people who live in the lake and own and operate the lake, how do we minimize the input of nutrients to the best of our abilities to slow down that eutrophication process? And that's a key thing and part of what our education focuses on. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to turn it over to Bill Kirkpatrick. He's the president of Aquatic Environment Consultants. They've been doing our water quality management, water quality monitoring, and lake management activities for, I don't know, about 20 years right now. And I will turn it over to Bill to talk about some of the real specific things.
You're muted, Bill.
Okay, you got me? Waiting for Mike to show the screen. There we go. Thank you, Mike. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as Larry was saying, this is a listing of the lakes. You have the 4 big lakes, and then we also do a little bit of work on Butler and Bright Pond. But here's kind of a breakdown of the activities that we do have done in the past and that we will be planning on doing this year. The larger lakes like Ann, Audubon, Newport, and Thoreau get monitored monthly, and I'll discuss that a little bit more. And then Bright and Butler get monitored once a year. For Lake Thoreau this year and Lake Ann, continuing with the algae treatments, being a little more proactive than in the past. And then hydrilla treatment will be done in Lake Thoreau this year, a little differently than last year. And then looking at alligator weed and primrose management in Lake Thoreau and water lily treatment in Lake Newport. So next slide, please. So a little more detail about what's the management plan that will kind of follow, or just a breakdown of these, is the water quality monitoring, treatments for blue-green algae. We're not trying to control green algae. We're trying to control the blue-green noxious forms of algae. The hydrilla invasive plant, managing that, and also the water lily treatment, and then alligator and water primrose also. Next slide, please, Mike. So the water quality monitoring, to discuss that in a little bit more detail, there's, as Larry said, there's a very robust data set on these lakes, which is extremely unique. There's some of these lakes have up to 4 years worth of annual data on them. And we try to do the sampling according to the protocol that was established, keep things similar to the time schedules and all that, so that we can go back and compare historic data to current data. And we discussed some of that last year in the fall when we had our lake meeting. We went over some of that in greater detail. So the monitoring program for this year will be similar to last year, and it occurs monthly beginning in April through September. Those are the warmer months of the year. That's when we're going to experience the most degraded water quality, and that's why we look at the lakes that time of year. The 4 big lakes get sampled 6 times throughout the summer, and Brighton Butler's Pond get once throughout the summer. There is a year-end report that is available that has all this monitoring data on it, and then looking back at the historic data also. Next slide, please. So what do we monitor for? So in these water bodies, we do a dissolved oxygen temperature profile. We also do a pH profile, a conductivity profile. So we're looking at how these levels change throughout the water body from the surface to the bottom of the lake. We also sample total phosphorus and chlorophyll A from the epilimnion, the surface water. It's a composite sample from those waters. And then from that composite sample, we also look at phytoplankton composition and zooplankton composition. In addition to that, we take a Secchi disk transparency, which is taken from the surface, basically measures visibility through the water. So next slide, please. So the treatments that are planned for this year are to basically be proactive with the blue-green algae management program. We've been very successful with that in Lake Ann. Lake Ann years ago, we kind of started off and there were some challenges trying to figure out how to make that program work. There was a diffused air system in the lake at one time, and we finally felt that that was causing more harm than benefit. And so that was removed, and we went to a monthly proactive program in Lake Ann. And the idea is to treat with low dose algicide concentrations before the blooms get heavy. The benefit of that, we can use less algicide, and there's less concern with any oxygen issues as that algae dies off. The algicide is more toxic to the blue-green algae. The green algae, the good algae, are more resistant to that. So we can actually direct the nutrient budget, the nutrient load that's in the lake, to produce more desirable algae and get rid of the undesirable algae. In Lake Thoreau, we haven't been treating algae in Lake Thoreau for that many years, but we're working through to try to develop the best plan for Lake Thoreau, and we're going to try to address it more proactively this year. We had some very clear water early on in Lake Thoreau, and we want to not treat when there's heavy concentrations of zooplankton and not much blue-green. So we'll monitor that and then make a decision based on that. So we want to be more proactive, and like I said, the goal is to control the noxious algae and allow the beneficial algae to exist. So next slide, please. This is kind of a picture of the variety of the algae blooms. They come in all shapes and sizes. There's tens of thousands of species of algae, and they vary throughout the year. And when you have a bloom on a lake, it may be predominantly one species, but it can also be, and usually is, a combination of many different species with usually one or two prominent types that are showing up in that algae bloom. But you may have an algae bloom in June and it may look similar to what you have in August, but it could be an entirely different composition of species. So next slide, please. So the hydrilla treatment. Hydrilla was a big concern in Lake Thoreau, and what was done last year in Lake Thoreau, the hydrilla grew till late in the year, and then the treatment was done kind of on an emergency basis, and we had a lot of vegetation die at once. The nutrients from that vegetation went into the water column, fertilized the algae bloom, and then we had a big algae bloom. So we've revisited this, we've rethought the process, and we used a contact herbicide last year because we treated late in the year, so we had to use a product that actually killed the plants on contact, and then the herbicide was dissipated quickly from the water column. This year's treatment is going to be a little different. We're going to start early in the growth stage for the hydrilla. We're going to use a systemic herbicide. It's going to be a very low dose application, but it's going to be a multiple dose application, kind of like taking, an antibiotic if a doctor gives it to you. You don't take it all at once, you split it over a certain time period to keep a certain concentration in your body. We do the same thing with the systemic herbicide on the hydrilla treatment. We will apply it on a clay pellet. The product is packed into the clay pellet. Clay pellet goes to the bottom where it releases like a time release capsule over time, and it keeps the low rate of the herbicide in contact with the hydrilla over a period of about 60 days. So what happens is we do an initial application. We'll be out there with a boat with a blower on it, and we'll be blowing these pellets in and around the dock and along the shoreline. The pellets sink to the bottom. The herbicide slowly comes off of that pellet, and it gets into the metabolism of the plant and causes the plant to be unable to produce food for itself. So rather than killing plant cells, we'll actually starve these plants where they can't get their nutrients and they just run out of resources and they die. But in order to do this, we have to keep that low dose of that herbicide around the plant throughout the summertime. Hence, that's why the 3 applications. So we do an initial higher rate, and then as those levels of herbicide dissipate, we'll come and bump that with a lower dose and then bump it again with a lower dose. So we keep this constant low dose exposure to these plants throughout the summer, and it will suppress that growth before it ever gets too far into the growth phase so that we don't have that big die off. We have a slow die off, and it's primarily targeting the hydrilla is what we're after. To keep the hydrilla in check, to keep it is an invasive plant. It is not a good plant for fish habitat, as we'll see here in another slide. So next slide, please. So here is hydrilla. This is what it looks like. It is a very, very invasive plant. It can grow very, very deep in the water column, and it produces these heavy monoculture beds that the fish actually have trouble feeding inside the hydrilla beds. So a lot of time fishermen will target the outer edge of the hydrilla bed for fish because that's really the only place that fish can feed. We've had water bodies, smaller water bodies, where there's been bass in the water body and loads of forage for the bass to feed on, but because the bass couldn't access the forage in the hydrilla bed, the bass were skinny and stunted. We go in and we remove the hydrilla, and the bass became robust again because they were able to now feed. So hydrilla is, while you hear fishermen talking about liking it, it's not really a good fishery habitat plant. So next slide, please. So looking at some other plants, Lake Newport has some white water lily in it. And while white water lily can be a native species, The white water lily in Lake Newport is a cultured ornamental white water lily that has invasive tendencies. When we first started working on controlling it in Lake Newport, we had to really change our procedure a little bit because we had some really tough issues controlling it. But it will be controlled in certain areas. It will be thinned out to allow access and prevent it from taking over the lake. It will be treated with a surface application that's sprayed on the foliage of the plant late in the year. At that time of the year, the plants are pulling nutrients down to their root system, their carbohydrates to store their energy for the next year, and they will pull the herbicide down to the roots and actually kill the root on the water lily. So that's how that has to be treated. Next slide, please. Here's a photo of the lilies in Lake Newport back in 2012, choking out boat docks and some of the coves. Pretty thick, heavy, robust roots on these plants. So next slide, please. Also, there's a good possibility that we will be treating alligator weed and water primrose in Lake Thoreau. It's tending to get out of hand there and be somewhat of an issue. It is present in Ann and Newport, but Thoreau's kind of where it's being targeted now. It has not been treated since 2015, and both of those species are kind of getting out of check. So next slide, please. You kind of see on the left here is the alligator weed, and on the right is the water primrose. So they tend to form these monocultures. When we think of desirable native species, we look for more diversity in the habitat than what we see. And it's just like the hydrilla, it forms a monoculture, chokes out desirable species of vegetation, and primrose and alligator weed do the same thing. Next slide, please. So that's what I have. So Larry's up, I guess.
All right, Mike, if you could go to the next slide, we'll just keep on rolling. What I want to do is talk about the costs. We talked about this last year, and we've got the 2021 budget approved. So I want to go over some of those highlights with you, and also talk about 2022, which that budget is just commencing the development cycle for that. But this is what we're initial proposal. So the environmental monitoring that Bill referenced, you can see the cost for that. That cost is, I think, remained the same for 3 years, which we're pleased. And then for the submerged aquatic vegetation treatment or management for Lake Thoreau, the 3-phase sonar treatment is about $19,000. The alligator weed and primrose, you can see that. I'm not going to go through these specifically. Again, this presentation will be up on the website. But we're making a much more substantial investment this year than we have in past years, and we're trying to be much more proactive as well. Another thing we're doing is stocking an additional sterile grass carp, and I think, and Will can correct me, but I think those are scheduled to come in mid.
Yep.
Late April.
On or about April 13th. I have a slide later on that we'll go over. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that, Will. And then the lilies, and then the algae management as well. And it's important to note that it's for up to 5 treatments. If we don't have to treat, we won't. I mean, we do the monitoring, and Bill and his staff are out there every 4 to 5 weeks, and Will and his staff are out, so we see this all the time. And so what we budgeted for is up to 5 treatments, which should take care of even if it's what we would consider a bad situation. So the total for 2021 is $51,000 for those management activities. Next slide, please. And then what we're forecasting for 2022, again, this will have to go through the budget development and approval process for the board of directors, would be to do the environmental monitoring, the water quality monitoring that we've done for many, many years. We think it's a great way to see the trends and hopefully, do some predictions as well. We want to evaluate the effectiveness of the three-phase treatment that Bill discussed a few minutes ago, because we think that's going to be really successful. And it is our hope that we don't have to do any hydrilla management or treatment for the next, it could be what, 2, 3, maybe even 5 years, depending on how effective that is with the treatment this year. And then the algae management, we would predict those to be the same as 2021, so that the total monitoring and treatment drops back down to 29. The main difference, of course, being the hydrilla treatment for lake throat this year. Next slide, please. And then just a comparison here, the monitoring is the same. Difference in the SAV management, again, the hydrilla, and obviously with the stocking of the grass carp too, we're hoping that they will be able to get a jump on anything that does come up. We don't want to overstock. As I said, we overstocked the very first time. We were only the second lake in Virginia in 1984 that got approved to do the sterile grass carp, and we reduced our stocking rate then to 2/3 of what the state had recommended, and that was our lake management consultant at that time. So I think you ought to back off that recommendation. And that was on a per acre basis. Now the recommendations are much more fine-tuned to a per vegetated acre. And so we think this is, we want to go at it gently. And then the algae management, as you can see at the bottom there, with the difference in the costs. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Will Peterson. And I think a lot of you on this call know Will. Have interacted with him on the lakes. He's out all the time. I'm going to go ahead and announce right now, Will is going to be leaving the Reston Association, moving to Colorado because his wife is being transferred. And so we're going to be looking for a replacement for Will. But I want to, in front of all these lake people, I want to thank Will for his service to Reston Association and his diligence to the lake and watershed management efforts here.
Thank you, Larry. And Mike, if you can pull up the next slide. Next. So the next number of slides are going to be essentially, each slide is going to be touching on one aspect of the lakes, whether it's, activities or things that we're out doing or things that we're looking for member assistance with doing. So Mike, if you could go to the next slide. Okay, so this was briefly discussed as one of the management strategies for 2021. The last time that we stocked carp was in 2018, and we're putting the same number of carp that we put in then. In order to stock carp in any lake in Virginia, you do need a permit from the Division of, or the Department of Wildlife Resources. So we obtain that, and we have to use a hatchery that is specified by the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources and as well. Stocking carp is fairly regulated, and it is specific to the sterile type, because I'm not sure if many of you have heard about some of the invasive carp that have been overpopulating some of the a lot of the rivers, but these will not reproduce. They're specifically there for managing. I know a number of, every year we find a few of the really big giant ones that can weigh up to 20 to 30 pounds that just die with age that we usually take out of the lake, or depending on where they are and if they're not disturbing anybody, we leave them in the lake for the turtles to feast on and the other wildlife to take care of it naturally. But we are hoping that this 80 carp will help provide a more natural management strategy to go along with the herbicide treatments. And so these are a couple of pictures. I think these pictures are from when we stocked, I want to say in 2015. Next slide, please. Again, here's a little bit of difference between the common carp and the triploid grass carp. They look slightly different. And we do ask if anybody catches one of these, that they be returned to the water immediately. There is one of the things that I have had reports, especially in Lake Ann, some people thought it was a good idea to release koi into the lake, and some of those get just as big as some of the carp. and they do affect the water body. So we're not big fans of koi either. So if you catch those, feel free to take those out of the lake. Next slide. The other thing that we are actively doing right now is goose management. Reston Association obtains a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service permit. Fairfax County also conducts this same management activity. If it wasn't RA, they would probably be coming and doing a lot of the same areas, but we work with them. We've been to trainings that they've put on, and we actually help them manage some of their properties as well. The big issue though for Reston Association is almost 90% of the nests are on non-RA property. So myself and Ben Rhodes, our watershed specialist, will get out there. We'll try to look on all the shorelines of the lakes. We look on parking garages around Reston that have planter boxes. It's like we got Easter coming up, so we're dealing with eggs. So it's kind of like a big Easter egg hunt, and that we're trying to identify the eggs. And so in order to do the management program, we do need consent from property owners. So there's always, every year, there's a few nests that don't get addled. This nest, you can see there's about 4 eggs in it, but I've found up to 10 eggs in a nest at a time. And if all those eggs are successful, one nest can produce 10 extra geese to populate Reston's lakes. And the big things the reasons why we manage them is because they are non-migratory. The ones that are here to stay. They're not going to be moving during their migratory phase. They pretty much stay here all year. They cause traffic disturbances, they cause damage to people's properties, and they also put a huge amount of nutrients in the lakes, which can also create some of those algae blooms. And so we're not trying to eradicate the goose population, we're just trying to keep it down to an acceptable level. So if you do see a goose nest out on the lakes, please let us know. If you have one on your property, let us know. We have an access agreement to complete. And even if you don't want us to addle the eggs, if you find it on your property, we would appreciate knowing that there's a nest there, because we do keep track of the eggs that we don't addle as well. And if you aren't interested in the addling, which is essentially we coat the eggs in a corn oil to prevent them from hatching. And if you don't feel comfortable with that occurring on your property, we do ask that you just try to take measures to discourage the geese from coming onto your property. They love pots that don't have plants in them, and we encourage people to either put some hardy plant in it or some rocks to make it an undesirable nesting location, and just trying to reduce those places where they want to nest. So next slide. Another thing that we are doing, we already got DRB approval to put them out. We're putting out 2 fishing line recycling containers. There was some concern last year with anglers disposing of their line on the lake, and we wanted to make sure that there was a good solution to be able to recycle that line and dispose of it properly. Craig Gross, who's a member and Lake Thoreau area resident, approached us and said that he was more than willing to help us with that and take care of the tubes once we installed them. DRB approved them. We're just waiting for some of the stickers to come that describe what they are before we put them out, but they should be out within the next month or so. There's right now, before we expand it to all of the lakes, we're just doing it at Lake Thoreau. Both tubes are going to be put out on RA property. One is at the Lake Thoreau dock, where our maintenance boat is kept, right next to Lake Thoreau Pool. And then the other one is over at the unimproved boat ramp access off of South Lakes by the Ridge Heights intersection. Next. Coming up in a couple of months, once we actually have it start growing, we actively manage purple loosestrife. This is a plant that is found on shorelines and spreads very quickly. It's an invasive exotic weed. A single plant can produce over 300,000 seeds. So once it gets established, it spreads pretty rapidly. This is also found in people's garden beds. So it's not only found on the shoreline, it does well in garden beds too. So we have worked with a couple of property owners to remove it from their yards as well. We've been pretty active over the last 5 years in removing this. We do not use pesticides on this. We actually go out with shovels and we try to dig it up as much as we can to get all of the roots. Sometimes, depending on where it's growing, it sometimes grows out of bulkheads and stuff. So we can't always get all of the roots, but it is pretty well taken care of. And we primarily find it on Lake Newport right now, as well as there's a decent sized patch that we're still managing over at the Sunrise Valley wetland. But if you happen to see a plant that looks like this, it has a very bright purple flower on it that is kind of like in a cone shape at the top, let us know and we would love to be able to manage that and remove it from your property. Next slide, please. Another one that we haven't started actively managing is yellow flag iris. I'm pretty sure it's on all of our lakes. We also have blue flag iris around the lakes, which is actually the native one. You have a really nice picture there with a hummingbird. The big difference is, well, other than the fact that one's invasive and not native and the other one's native, is that because the yellow flag is not native, it doesn't provide a good food source for our native species like that hummingbird. It also is much, much more aggressive than the native and creates dense patches and creates a monoculture. So right now, this year, we're going to start trying to evaluate its extent. We're going to be going out and mapping it and just kind of figuring out what the best way to manage it is. However, if you are finding it on your property, we would love to hear about it. It has a slightly different bloom time than the blue flag. The yellow iris blooms first, typically. And so when we were out, we started trying to look where it was last year, but a lot of it had already flowered, and it's very hard to tell the difference between them when there aren't flowers on the plants. So again, we are starting to take a look at that, and that's hopefully an invasive that we're going to be aggressively attacking in the near future. Next slide. Okay, so Bill mentioned this earlier as one of the things that they do when they do their lakes management. We do this as well in July. There's July is National Lakes Appreciation Month. And as part of that, the North American Lake Management Society encourages people near lakes or lake or associations with lakes in them to work nationwide to use secchi dips to evaluate their lakes. Essentially, so you have the diagram in the bottom right corner. It's a white disc, a white and black disc. You lower it down into the water until you can't see it anymore. And then you take that measurement, and what that's telling you is how much light is able to get through whether it's algae or suspended particles in the lake, but it lets you know what the turbidity or the clarity is of your lake. Reston staff usually does this, but we definitely encourage anybody with a boat that lives out on the lake to borrow our secchi discs and go out and do that. It is focused in July, but if you are interested in doing this and providing some additional data for us to use, we would be more than happy to work with residents to do this throughout the entire year. Just reach out to me if you're interested in doing that. Next slide. Again, lake cleanups. We haven't had an actual lake cleanup in a few years. That's like a big volunteer organized activity. We used to, but nobody ever wanted to go out in the canoes. They essentially just walked on the pathways. However, every year I have a number of residents that go out on their kayaks and canoes and help pick up trash. RA staff, myself and Ben, we go out in our John boat at least once a month per lake and clean up the lake. I mean, pretty much every time it rains, more trash is getting deposited into the lake through runoff. It's carried down our stormwater culverts. And I mean, on trash days, if people don't have their trash cans secured properly, that it blows in from that as well. However, so the trash that's you see in that truck right there, that was from last month while Lake Audubon was still lowered, and we got about 6 full bags of trash. Me and Ben walked the shoreline, and that was within 2 hours. We got 6 bags just within 2 hours. So trash is always present in the lakes. We do our best to try to tackle it, but it readily makes its way back into the lake. So we do greatly appreciate it if our Reston members happen to have a day out on their kayak or canoe or a boat or see some trash. Please help us keep our lakes clean. And we love to hear stories about how much trash you've collected, because we actually keep track of the number of bags that are collected, regardless of who picks it up. A couple of cleanup that's coming up. It's actually full, so unfortunately we can't have any additional volunteers for it, but every year we do a spring and a fall cleanup. This spring one is associated with Chesapeake watershed communities, and we are within the Chesapeake Bay. All of our waters run to the Potomac and eventually the Chesapeake. And we have 4 sites this year. One is being managed by a school group. We have one at Hunter's Woods, one on South Lakes by 7-Eleven, and one new this year. We're working with the county. It's actually in county property over at by the Bowman Library, or by the library on Bowman Drive. So at each of those sites, we're having about 25 volunteers collecting trash in and around our watershed. And even though it's from the streams, if we didn't pick up the trash in those streams, it would eventually make its way to the lakes. So we do have cleanups. Keep an eye out for some in the future. And if you do pick up some on the lake, please let us know. And if you want supplies, we are more than happy to give you free bags, gloves, and a grabber to temporarily use. The trash cleanups that we participate in, the organizations that those are through, always provide us with those supplies. Next slide. Okay, so this is mainly for Lake Audubon residents. When we lowered the lake, we discovered what the structure or the piece of metal that was in. We originally discovered it about 2 years ago, shortly after the dredging, because some of our members were hitting something with their boat. Unfortunately, myself and my coworkers were unable to remove it manually, but our contractor is going to be coming out there with some heavier equipment to remove that. The date is still to be determined. We were thinking about doing it while the lake was lowered, but even with that lowered state, the water was too difficult for a barge type watercraft to get to it, and trying to walk out to it, we sunk pretty quickly. So we are still planning on getting that. It will be done later this spring. Next slide. I sent out an email this morning. So if you're a boat owner, you probably received it, and we've had a huge response of a lot of people renewing their boat permits. Today marked the last day for the 2020 to 2021 permit, and tomorrow starts the new permit for the next year. The rates for the boats did slightly go up, but other than that, it's all the same. You can pay through WebTrack, and the permit looks the same, and you'll receive a 21 decal. So if you get a chance and you own a boat, please renew when you get a chance. Next slide. So fish habitat in Thoreau. We're only focusing on Thoreau right now. We have one of our members, Dennis Neese, who has been very active. I've actually gotten a couple of calls from members thinking that someone's dumping stuff in the lake, and he is dumping stuff, but it's on purpose, because since they're essentially storm water ponds, they're man-made, they don't have a lot of habitat for our fish population. Typically, man-made lakes are devoid of downed trees and other kind of substrate or natural pieces of wood or debris that creates habitat for fish to hang around in. So what Dennis is doing is he's volunteered to use his boat, and he's been on some of those slides. You can see that he affixed some sticks together between some concrete blocks, as well as we collected a bunch of Christmas trees during the winter that he sank to the bottom. He's also creating piles of those cinder blocks, just because the cinder blocks themselves with that big open space creates great habitat for the fish to go around in. You can see the map on the bottom. Those 4 X's are where we're putting those, and all of those locations are a minimum of, I believe, 10 feet deep. So those are not going to be obstacles for boats while you're traveling through the water. They're deep enough where you probably won't ever see them unless it's a super clear day, but it's still providing a great fish habitat. Dennis Neese has a fish finder that he regularly takes out on his boat. He loves to fish. He's huge on bass fishing. And with his fish finder, he has been checking the one site he's been working on, and he's already seen a huge increase in the fish that's utilizing the habitat that's put into the lake. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, before you go on, I just want to touch on, if you have a dock and you're interested in creating some additional habitat, one of the things that the Department of Wildlife Resources has recommended is trying to encourage people that live on the lake to create fish habitat in and around their property. So if you have a dock, one of the simplest things is to get some heavier woody debris and create structure underneath your dock. And it's something as simple as that, just creating something that the fish can hide and swim around in to encourage those areas for fish habitat. Okay, next slide. And this is mainly a reminder. Again, there's no swimming on any of Reston's lakes. It's listed in the resolution. We do not maintain the lakes for swimming conditions. We don't have lifeguards out there. They are stormwater ponds. And so if something happened to you while you were swimming, there is nothing that we want to make sure that you're safe. We never know if there's going to be an algae bloom or some other kind of obstacle in the lake that might have washed in from a storm. And Reston Association has a huge number of pools accessible for our members to use. So please enjoy the lakes using boats, go out there and fish. But when it comes to swimming, please stick to the pools. Next slide. Here's a couple of additional events that are coming up. Again, like I talked, the Potomac River Watershed Cleanup is coming up 2 Saturdays from now on the 10th. You can see a picture of on the bottom right-hand corner. That's over at the Hunters Woods site. And I think that was one from about 2 years ago. Pretty much, even though we have a cleanup at Hunters Woods twice a year, every time we get a full pickup load, plus our pathways crews go out there and clean up. And we also actually have a volunteer team of 2 or 3 people. I can't remember what the team was, but our pathways supervisor knows. And so that area is always cleaned, but regardless, twice a year, we'll at least get one full pickup truck full of trash just from that one site alone. On that same day, we're making a full day out of it of watershed activities. We are doing a stream monitoring introduction. We monitor 11 sites in Reston, and this is where we're looking at the macro invertebrates, the bugs that live in the stream. And so we're always interested in getting new volunteers that want to help. The majority of our sites are monitored by volunteer teams. So the site that we're doing that day is one that RA does, but we want to try to educate and maybe get some newly interested monitors to help us with that program. I think it's 7 out of the 8 spots have already filled, and we're keeping it low because we are in close proximity around only 4 tables with COVID. We want to make sure that that event is safe. But if you're interested in stream monitoring and maybe not able to attend that event, please reach out to us because we're always looking for new volunteers with that interest. Coming up in May, on May 7th, is the Lake Ann Sunset Paddle. I want to say this is the 3rd, if not 4th year we've done that. We go out, I want to say around 10 canoes or kayaks, and it's a nice, relaxed tour. We'll have myself, and then we also have someone from the Walker Nature Center, and we essentially give an educated tour of Lake Ann. We're hoping to do another one of these later in the year on Audubon, so it'll be the first time for that, but plans are still in the work for that one. On May 8th, we have our rain barrel workshop. It's one of the ways where you can try to collect rainwater and use that on your property. That's being put on by the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District, and that's also at the Nature Center. And then the last thing, at least in the near future, is our kids fishing derby at Lake Audubon. The top picture is actually from that fishing derby. We use a portion of RA property by the boat ramp, and this was actually started as an Eagle Scout project, and since it was successful and so many people were interested in it, RA has kept it on for the last, I think it's going to be the 5th year, if I'm not mistaken, that we're doing that one. And you know, it's a great opportunity to get kids out learning about or getting out into nature and fishing. We just had our trout fishing day about 2 weeks ago now in the Snake Den stream by 7-Eleven. And so if you want to try catching a trout, you can always try to get out there. There might be some left in the stream. So next slide, please. And remember, I just want to point out that, you know, Reston's lakes are Reston's community assets. I know people that live on the lakes have a direct relationship with the lakes, but they are for everybody in the Reston, and we love to be able to see people out there. We have a picture of the old art sculpture that's on the Lake Thoreau riser structure. The new sculpture just was installed yesterday. So if you haven't seen it yet, definitely go and take a look. The students put a lot of effort into it. You know, get out there, explore our lakes, get, you know, use kayaks, canoes, get some fishing in. If you haven't done so already, you know, really go out and explore not just the lake that you live on, but any of the lakes in Reston. Next slide. Okay, I'll turn it over back to Julie and we'll open up the session for questions and answers.
Great, thank you so very much. And I know that there were a lot of questions on the chat room. So Larry, Sean, Will, help me make sure we don't miss any of them. I'll do the one that I know I took an action item for, and that was Jennifer had asked if we could make sure that the 2020 reports that we're getting on the lake monitoring, both by monthly and annual, are out on the website that we've got for the lake community and company. So we'll take care of that one.
So just a note on that one.
Yeah.
Because that report is a consolidation of all of their measurements throughout the year, we actually only get one report at the end of the year. There's not a monthly report that we get.
Oh, okay.
But we do have that. We got that. And I shared it with our communications team, and it should be on the website in the near future. It's not up there yet, but it will be soon.
Okay, great. First question I saw was from Beth about weed killer that perhaps their cluster that borders the lake might be using, and what are we doing to advise and counsel our lakefront community, and not only our lakefront folks, because I know in our environmental advisory committee, they've also addressed the stormwater runoff and how the chemicals used on people's lawns and stuff can affect that. So I don't know, do we have something posted specifically on that point?
Unfortunately, I know, especially when Claudia was here, we tried to get something. All we can really do is educate people and say, you know, be aware of what you're putting on your yards, especially if you're immediately adjacent to the lake.
Mhm.
But at this point in time, we do not have the authority to tell what someone
Can
can
use or
put on
not
their
use, but we can
private
probably,
property.
and maybe Will and Mike Leone, you can work on a quick thing that could go into the Friday blast, just, talking again about from our razor report, some things to avoid in terms of adding chemicals to our stormwater.
One thing that is great that is available as a free service though,
Mhm.
if anybody is interested in getting their yard checked to see what actual nutrients it does need, I know the easy thing to do is go to Home Depot or Lowe's or your local garden center and just grab a bag of all-purpose fertilizer. But the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District, they have a program where you can get a soil sample of your yard. I think it's done by Virginia Tech through the program off the top of my head, where they're actually take a look at your soils and what's in them, and they can say, okay, instead of buying that big bag of fertilizer, here's exactly what you need. And it really limits what you don't need. And, that way of doing things is a great way because all that excess nutrients or fertilizers that your yard isn't absorbing or utilizing is just going to run off into the lakes or watershed as runoff.
Mhm. I see we've got a question that kind of talks about the hydrilla treatment and concern whether or not it's going to affect the lakes. This year, kind of experiencing what they experienced last year. And I know that we've kind of touched on that tonight, but you want to speak to that again, Bill or Larry?
Yeah, Bill, you want to touch on that?
Okay, my phone was ringing here in the house, which never rings and threw me off. But it's a totally different approach from last year. Last year, there were no plans to treat the hydrilla. And when the hydrilla got so bad and there was so many complaints and it was out of control, the only real course of action and try to get it in check was to come in and treat with a contact herbicide. This year is a proactive approach, and treating early should suppress that growth, and we shouldn't have near the problem that we had last year.
And just to clarify, Bill, with this, we don't. It's not necessarily applied when we're seeing the hydrilla actively growing. It's more of a pre-emergent treatment, correct?
Yeah. What it is you want to apply it as the plant starts to grow, because that's when it's most susceptible, and that's when it's going to pull the herbicide in and metabolize it. And that's what we want. So we don't want it really before the hydrilla starts growing, but before most people will notice the hydrilla growing.
And typically the last 2 years when we were watching the hydrilla, I personally didn't see it actively or like aggressively starting to grow until closer into the June and July timeframe.
So we probably treat somewhere around the third week of May would be the first one.
Okay.
Right.
So here's a curious question. How come we don't see the hydrilla, which has been so prevalent in Thoreau, migrate over to Lake Audubon? Anybody have a response to that question?
Well, I imagine we probably have hydrilla in Lake Audubon. I don't know if you've spotted it, Will.
I don't see it very, very often. There's no coves that are overly grown with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible a fragment could go right over the spillway, and I'm sure many did and end up in Lake Audubon, but then they need the opportunity to take root once they get into that lake.
Okay. I know we're estimating in our budget, our annual budget, for a certain amount of money to address the lakes and their health. I don't remember off the top of my head what we put in the 2021 budget, but are we thinking that as we look to the coming years, that you're anticipating upping that dollar amount? That was a question from Lori Zell.
I think it depends on how the lake reacts. I mean, we've got a lot more invested this year, in part mainly in part to the more proactive hydrilla treatment on Lake Thoreau. And, you know, we as an organization, and I think the board has to be nimble, that what we're forecasting for instance, for 2022, we think will be sufficient. But again, we don't control Mother Nature. And so there may be some things that come up that the board may have to, and the staff may have to, you know, do a budget amendment or something. But we believe what we put together and with the forecast for 2022 is an adequate amount.
Yeah. Well, you'll see, because you'll be passing the 2022-2023 budget in November. So you'll see how this year kind of goes and some adjustments that you might want to make on that.
Exactly.
And will
So,
you put those?
just one thing to add, just kind of back to the question about the hydrilla and Audubon. I just want to remind everybody that one of the most common ways for invasives to get from one water body to another is, you know, going out and enjoying those lakes via kayak or canoe. And one of those things might get stuck to the bottom. So we do ask that everybody that are boat owners, if you happen to take your kayak to the Chesapeake or take it somewhere else outside of Reston, or even just between the lakes within Reston, just do a really thorough job of taking a look at your boat and making sure that there aren't any plant hitchhikers taking a ride to one of the other lakes, because before we have to worry about controlling it in the lake, we want to try to prevent it from getting there in the first place.
So you want clean boats going into our lakes and between our lakes is what you're suggesting. Can you do that? That sounds like a good idea.
Water chestnut is a big invasive that's starting to pop up in the mid-Atlantic region. Luckily, we don't have it in Reston's lakes yet. And hopefully we don't get it, but there's always the possibility if it's stuck on someone's boat. Or if it, one of the other common ways for it to get from lake to lake is it's sticking to geese. So when geese are traveling from one spot to another, they have the potential to bring it in too. So another little positive reason why we should manage the goose population.
I noticed that when you talked about those new fishing line disposal pipes, are they only at Lake Thoreau for this coming year and not at, do we not fish on other lakes too?
We do fish on other lakes, but I didn't want to do a huge push of them all in one year. I wanted to see how it goes, how successful they are, how much people actually use them before putting them out at other locations.
Okay. What about those, if I say it incorrectly, correct me, Sekidis? Sekidis. If people want to have their own versus borrow, what do you think about that?
You can search on Amazon, or, you know, there's plenty of websites that sell them. I think there's some even how to make your own out of a piece of plastic or even a piece of wood. You just want to make sure that the rope or the line that you're using is marked correctly with half foot or foot increments. All of our data has been in foots. I know a lot of them are sold in meters. I mean, it's we're easy to convert that, you know, from one measurement to another. But yeah, if someone is really proactive and wants to go get their own and go out to the lakes at their own convenience and share that data with us, we would love to take that data from them.
We've got a question from Ernie Robbins about fish and the fish population and surveys we're doing. Some fish doing better than others. I know we don't want koi. I know you talked about carp, but and have we seen anyone ever checking for fishing licenses amongst our members?
We do have private lakes. However, you are still required to have a Virginia fishing license to fish. We don't go actively out and check people's licenses. And we have asked on occasion for DWR officers what the possibility of them coming out. But again, since they're private, they don't come out to our lakes either. However, I have had a couple of times where residents have been concerned about a particular angler or two, and I have gone out and talked with them and just provided them some information on the fishing policies in Reston. So if anybody sees a concern with a particular angler, feel free to try to share with as much info with me, and we can try to address that.
Okay. I've got a series of questions from Jennifer. So let's try to see what we can answer on those. How has RA engaged the county related to stormwater runoff into our lakes, and what is the strategy? Larry, I think that's something we addressed with supervisor, and we also got in touch with a county person as well. I don't remember.
Right, we have talked to the county on numerous occasions. You know, part of this, I guess we'll call it an issue, is that we don't own, like for example, in Lake Thoreau, we own so little of that watershed. You know, the vast majority of the natural stream channel in that watershed goes through Reston National Golf Course, which we have no control over. It's not even under our covenants. And so we engage the county where we can. I know Will just had a kickoff meeting on another stream restoration project that the county's going to do up in North Reston. It does not flow into one of our lakes, but you know, we do interact with them on a frequent basis. It's just that in a static watershed such as Lake Thoreau, right now the county doesn't have that much involvement on private properties. In Lake Audubon watershed, we had the stream restoration project, which is a great asset long term for that lake in terms of water quality, and we should, I think, over time see a reduction in the amount of sediment we need to pull out of there.
I can speak on Reston National Golf Course that the current course management company, Kemper, I don't know, Kemper Sports, I guess is the last name, but it's Kemper. They have a program that they call Green to Tee. So they do rate their courses and their management on a green aspect. So I think we're fortunate that they have taken over the course management. I know it's something that we've shared with them, both the EAC report, the Razor report, and our concerns about the chemicals that they do use. That is Big Dog who wants to be fed.
One thing I'd like to add is I do have some good contacts with the county. So if there's anything like stormwater infrastructure that's dammed up or blocked up, that's the county's responsibility. If I'm not aware of it and you see an issue, definitely bring that to my attention. I can work with the county to resolve those issues. I've had pretty good success in having them come out quickly. And just a couple other things, like for there used to be a concrete outfall into Lake Thoreau that has shot water into the lake, and last year they actually replaced that with a rock swale to reduce the velocity. So they are doing some projects, but unfortunately they can't focus on just Reston, and they are working with us when they're able to.
To put the dogs out on the deck. We dredge every so often with the different lakes, and I know we have a cycle by which we do it. I thought that we did it more than every 15 years, which is the question, is that dredging cycle still realistic?
It depends on the lake. So for the larger lakes, it's every 15 years. For the smaller lakes like Lake Ann and Lake Newport, it's more frequent. We do have a dredging cycle that goes out a number of years. I don't have that data available, but depending on the lake, it may be more frequent.
Right.
And Julie, it's on an as needed basis.
Right, that's what I thought, because I remember one year we moved one up, or we pushed it back because when we were measuring the sediment, we were okay. So, but I do know that that's factored into as you say, and our estimates in our capital expenditures that we have to do. The dam inspections that we recently did on Audubon Thoreau, how did those go?
We do quarterly inspections. We're actually required to do annual inspections, but we believe with the older dams doing quarterly inspections, it makes more sense. And anything that gets identified in those inspections, we take care of. We recently replaced the spillway gates and trash racks down at Lake Audubon. We've done similar at Lake Thoreau and Lake Ann. So we're very proactive on the dam management front.
Great. Alum. We used that last year, but I don't recall that being discussed about using.
No, we haven't used alum.
Alum.
Yeah, we actually got sort of a pre-proposal. It was very, very expensive. And we determined that that was not an effective way to go, and particularly in an urban lake. I think the difficulties with an urban lake, as I talked about, with the high potential storm flow throughs, it has to be timed absolutely perfectly to be effective. And there's risk of essentially throwing alum down the drain.
Mm.
So we opted not for that course of action.
Okay. For this community event, I know we sent out a personal email to all the boat owners that we had email addresses for, right? Will, you had sent out
Yes.
advance notice, and Mike Leone, you had some perhaps some additional members that we sent out. We had social media contact flyers going out. I don't recall whether we had developed a specific Lakes community distribution list. Forgive me, I just don't remember how we were addressing that last fall. So is there a process to make sure that we don't miss people other than our increased social media and reaching out to the boat owners?
We'll answer that one.
I mean, the main list that I have is the boat owners, because every boat that's on the lake provides us with their contact information. If you're not a boat owner, it's hard for me to obtain your personal information. We definitely are more than happy to include people that say, hey, I'm interested in this. Can you add me to the list? And we do depend also on, I know there's a number of Facebook groups and the Nextdoor community website. There's a couple of individuals we send the information, and I know that they share that with the wider community, and we really appreciate that. But I mean, it's hard to get 100% of the individuals. I know our communications team, put out additional information via, the social media page and on via RA News. So definitely, if you aren't subscribed to RA News, it is a weekly news update that goes out every Friday, and things like this meeting are put out.
Right.
It's not lake specific, but
Right.
I primarily utilize the boat registered owners to disseminate information on the lakes.
Yeah, and we are putting out some alerts. I do know that one of the things I checked just in the last couple of weeks, knowing how active the Lake Thoreau Facebook page is, and thank you very much to our Facebook coordinator there, Dave, and I won't say his last name because I'll screw it up. But there isn't an equivalent to them for the other lakes. There isn't a Facebook equivalent for the other lakes, and maybe that's something that those members who live on that lake, and we also want to reach people. Our lakes are for everyone, not just those who happen to be on the lakefront or own a home. So I think, as Will said, it's important to get people to get on the distribution for the Friday email blast and whatever.
And not only for having RA distribute information to our members, the watershed team is two people. It's me and Ben. So we can't be on the lakes all the time. We're not out there on weekends. We're not out there at nights. So, I mean, we rely on the people that live on the lakes to share things that they see. Like, for example, today we had a couple of members saying, what's going on out on Lake Audubon? There's a couple of guys putting stuff in the lake in yellow raincoats. It turned out to be Fairfax County Stormwater fixing a blocked stormwater outfall. But we appreciated those individuals. It could have been something entirely different. You know, we do see algae blooms out there, but you as residents you guys look out your breakfast or out your window while you're eating breakfast and be like, what is that on the lake? So we definitely appreciate when you guys say, hey, did you know about this? Because sometimes we don't. And the earlier that we find out, the sooner that we can take action and try to remedy the situation.
Mhm. I think I got most of the questions or the essence of the questions that have been in the chat room. I'm going to ask for people to raise their hands if there's something you think we didn't quite get. We are capturing the comments that are made in the chat room, and we'll make sure that we get more info, communicated. And we certainly will be posting this community meeting, this Zoom, into the website that we're maintaining on this.
It does look like Doug Britt had his hand up.
Yeah, and I was going to call on him because some of the chat room comments, I thought, oh, Doug could answer those. And then I see that Philip also raised his hand. So maybe after Doug, we can. Go ahead, Doug.
Doug, you can unmute.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to remind everybody that the RACER report, the Reston Annual or Association State of the Environment Report, is on the RA website now, but also the 2020 recommendations and the recommendations report card that tracks those recommendations progress is now available on the website. And so it includes a lot of recommendations for dealing with problems on the 4 lakes and the 2 major ponds here in Reston. So wanted to make sure if you're interested, you look at those recommendations, and some of those are directed towards Reston Association, some are directed towards the county, but many of those are recommendations that individual homeowners can implement to help solve some of our problems. I also, there was a question about fisheries. I just want to mention that the state, in their latest survey that they did free of charge of our Reston lakes, found again that one of the big problems for our fisheries is the lack of forage fish. So again, if we can develop some better habitat enhancements for the lakes, that would help there. They also found, interestingly, that I forget whether now it was Audubon or Thoreau, the red ear sunfish population had some of the nicest sized fish that they have found in any Virginia urban lakes. So that was interesting. And we had a positive there. I also want to mention something just to, to think about in the future, because in the Reston, in the RACER report, I know we have reported that Canadian geese typically do not defecate in lakes. They do on the watershed, of course, as you all know, and unfortunately are aware of seeing their stuff all over the paths at times, yes, and docks. But I noticed something different this year. I mean, it was noticeable to me. In Lake Newport, we probably don't have as many geese as the larger lakes, but because Lake Newport is so much smaller, I would bet we have more geese per acre than the other lakes. And when I was out walking at times where we've had a long freeze and the lake still has maybe a 20% of the middle of the lake open, well, the geese population is using the ice as land and defecating there. So the whole lake surrounding the open water was just brown or gray with defecation, which of course, when the ice melts, went directly into the lake. So it was maybe a bigger problem than I thought originally that it might be in terms of nutrient enrichment from our wonderful friendly geese.
Oh, very kind. Philip.
Hi, yeah, I wanted to talk about the lack of foliage fish in Lake Ann. And I didn't see the written report. I don't know if there was one, but I did watch the video where they said that the sunfish and crappie and other bream were the lowest he has ever seen, extremely low. And going around the lake, there are no sunfish beds of any significance. The 2007 report said that Lake Ann was the only ecologically balanced lake in terms of it had enough bream to support the bass. So I wonder if there's any thoughts about stocking some sunfish to get that fish balance back up into where it should be.
We have looked at stocking fish. One of the things that when we did reach out to hatcheries and had discussions with the Department of Wildlife Resources was that they recommended that we create habitat for the fish before stocking the fish. That's why on Lake Thoreau, we're trying to use that as like a testing ground to put some habitat in. So that is something that we have discussed as a management option, but not quite ready to do at this time.
Well, there is habitat for the sunfish. There's all the sunfish beds that were there that are no longer occupied. I mean, if you're going up the lake on the right-hand side, just before the condos, there's that patch and it's full of moon-shaped craters and there's no sunfish there. There was also some directly across the lake. So the habitat was there in 2007 to support them and continuing through, but something is attacking the beds. I think it's carp. Personally, that's my bet that they're just eating all the eggs.
Well, specifically on Lake Ann, because I know that's where you live, Phil. Is I mentioned that the koi are there. I know Ben Rhodes went out on the lake yesterday and actually saw a giant one, and they might be one of the impacts. So again, if you happen to see koi or catch koi, try not to put them back in the lake. I know I've heard that they love to eat marshmallows, so try to use that as bait.
Not the ones I have.
Those types of non-native species that enter the lake do affect the ecosystem.
Okay, because the sunfish has been not there before the koi came in the lake. But all right, whatever. Thank you for the time.
I want to make everyone aware that Ben did put his email address and his phone number in the chat room. I don't know if we can get a visual of Ben. I know he's with us tonight. But maybe
There he is.
He is. Hi, Ben. You want to
Unmute.
say hi and tell him all the things you'll welcome and respond to.
Oh yeah, so yeah, hi, I'm Ben Rhodes. I'm the watershed specialist. I work under Will. You know, like Will said, we make up the watershed team, and you're welcome to leave me a voicemail or an email anytime about anything having to do with the health of our lakes, any litter concerns. Like Will said, we had a couple of phone calls today. Someone called him about what they thought might have been some dumped paint. It ended up being pollen. But if it had been paint, we would have liked to respond to that, right away. So please feel free to give me a call about any concern. Yeah.
Oh, I guess, just since Ben mentioned that with the paint or the pollutants, one slide I didn't actually include in this presentation is another big project that we do rely on volunteers for is our storm drain marker project. We have tons of storm drains all throughout Reston, and all of them go directly into our streams and our lakes. And we rely on volunteers to go out there and put them out. And essentially it's just a friendly reminder to please don't dump stuff in the drain because it's going into your lake. So if you're interested in doing that, reach out to Ben and I, and we can try to hook you up with some storm drain markers to put out.
That's great. I know that in addition to those volunteer things, we've had a couple young people create and build turtle docks, is right? Out in the lake, and I saw there was a couple conversations going on in the chat room about creating some fish cover through using branches and things. I'm not quite sure what you all call those, but there did seem to be, I think it was David. Was it David that knew a lot about creating those?
Yeah, I think it's Dennis.
Dennis, fish,
Mhm.
fish sanctuaries. So I don't know if Dennis wants to, make himself known and say, hey, here's what I can help you with, or if we can have any little tips or guidance put out there for others in doing that.
Well, as I don't know if Dennis is going to speak or not, but yeah, I mean, just certainly reach out to Ben. Well, as noted in the chat and elsewhere, structure is key, and that's part of that delicate balance that I talked about very early on of having plants provide structure. Sometimes it can be too much structure, as Bill talked a little bit about, but trying to keep a good balance, both from the fisheries, the species diversity of fish, size and age diversity. Structure is probably one of the most important things that we can do. And, if you don't have natural structure with the plants, then artificial structure is the next best thing.
Oh, I think Dennis just got his mic on.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know if you guys could hear me or not. I'm sorry. Yeah, as far as the dropping of the brush piles, guys, and ma'am, we call them brush piles, rock piles. That's basically the terminology of it. I've been doing it for a very, very long time. Years ago, we did a big project here. Larry Butler remembers we dropped, I don't even know how many Christmas trees in both Lake Thoreau and Lake Audubon. The trees, we use Christmas trees. And lately I've been using a lot of blowdowns, branches that are between 8, 10, maybe even 15 feet long. I've been bundling together and attaching 8 by 8 by 16 cinder blocks and sinking them in water between 9 and about 12 to 14 feet. I've been trying to concentrate on areas where hydrilla edges stop and hard bottom begins, where it meets actual hard bottom, because that's the areas that fish really like and concentrate on. Fish are very, very edge-related creatures, whether it's hard cover edges, grass edges, wood edges, whatever kind of edge is in a lake, they relate to them, whether it's a shallow edge, a deep edge, or whatever. So yeah, my project is beginning. Or continuing, should I say. I've been working throughout the winter. I've been concentrating my drops super early in the morning, in the mornings, and I've been working by myself. The hardest part of the work really is just humping down, carrying from the parking lot down to my boat, the 8 by 8 by 16s. I've probably got, in Lake Thoreau right now, I've probably got about 100 to 110 blocks on the lake bed now. Attached with various types of cover attached. The fish are moving in on the cover every day. The cover is reloading. Some of the fish are moving out, moving up into other areas that they desire on any given day due to wind and air temperature conditions. And then they are reloading back on the brush piles at nighttime. And they're moving up on the flats during the day. I was out today, just to give you guys a quick report, I had 16 fish today, and the fish were all between 2 and 8 feet deep. The cold fronts, whenever we're getting a cold front, it's pushing them off these flats and moving them back onto the cover that I'm dropping. As we lose the grass, and the grass is not here like it used to be, this project becomes more and more important, because we need to get the cover in the lakes, just like the gentleman a few minutes ago described. We cannot introduce a self-sustaining bait fish until we have enough cover for these bait fish to hide in from the predator fish. Dropping the cover does a lot of stuff. It gives the small fish places to hide, and it also gives in turn the big fish good ambush spots. So all of this stuff should be done in all the lakes. All the rested lakes need this work. And if I have any questions, I will answer them. I'll do my best.
Right, maybe you can put your email in the chat room or a phone number, whatever you think might be best, and you can always work through Ben. I'm going to wrap up this semi-annual, our second Lakes community meeting tonight, and I want to say a heartfelt thank you to Will. I did not know until tonight that you were off to another part of our beautiful country, Colorado. So thank you so much for the years that of service you've given us. It's been a pleasure of mine to work with you. So thank you very much.
Julie.
Yeah, and please, everyone, do check out the website. We'll make sure we add some of this stuff to it that we've talked about tonight, and look for alerts throughout the summer. Call Ben, email Ben, get in touch with us where you see things coming up, and we'll talk to you again in the fall on our next semi-annual meeting. Enjoy the lakes this summer. Hope everybody will get out there and use them.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks everybody for attending.
Appreciate it all.
Oh, Sterling has a last minute
Oops.
question.
Oh, he was saying
Oh,
bye.
he's just waving. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Good night, folks.
Good night.